So I've been getting some questions about why methods look different in different contexts, and I'm hoping that this feature of BlueJ will help you understand how this works. I've created this little class, which is kind of a nonsense class, but the idea is it's a blueprint for objects that we'll create. So when I create objects from this class, each one will have two attributes. One will be an integer and one will be a string, and there's no real meaning to it at all. The cool thing about BlueJ is that if I right-click on a class and the class has been designed correctly, I can go and create objects without actually running a program. So it simulates the creation of actual objects. So notice this is like that keyword new that we use to create objects, and then the name of the class is here. And then I can either create an object with nothing in the parentheses, and so the idea is var1 is a variable that represents this first object of the class. I'm going to go create another one. If I hit right click, I can create a new object by putting in an int in the first slot of the parentheses and then a string in the second slot. And when I click OK, it creates another object. So these little red icons kind of simulate actual objects in the computer's memory. Now real quick, just notice what I did there. When I right clicked on here, I saw these things as menu items, right? I can create a new object of this class. If I come down here and right click on this object, the first object, you'll notice that there are three different methods that I can execute if I want to. Void do stuff, empty parentheses. This is a method that I could call if I wanted to. Now the word void just helps me understand how this method behaves. Contrast these methods down here with the third one down here. The name of this method is yournum times mynum. We start it with an int. It's going to return an int value. So that tells us a little bit about the information there. The name of it is, as I just said, yournum times mynum, and then we have a little int yournum in the parentheses, which means we know when I execute this method, I will have to put some int value in the parentheses. When you see methods like this, it is simply a description of the method as if it were on a menu. It's trying to tell you about the method. What does this method do? How does this method behave? What kind of value does it return? What kind of information do you have to feed the method in order for it to do its business? This is not the code that executes at runtime. It really is like a menu, just like we're doing right here. We're looking at it like what's available. So when you see public static void, you're creating a menu item. If I see public void do stuff 1, you're creating a menu item. And we're going to do a lot of this next unit, all right? So don't get too worried about this for this unit, but right now you just have to understand that when you see a method in this context, it's describing you what you should do when you actually use it. If I were to actually execute this code, I would write var1, which is the name of the object, dot do stuff, open parenthesis, close parenthesis, semicolon. You don't write the word void, right? The word void helps you understand how the method behaves, but you don't actually write it. Let's actually call these things. So when I click on this, it simulates calling the method, all right? So when I click, it's as if in code I had written var1.dostuff1. When I click there, it says dostuff1:1. Now notice if I right click on dostuff1 on the other object, this is like var2.dostuff1, it does the same thing except that the number that pops up is a 5. Now if you remember, when I created the var2 object, I plugged in a 5 as the value for the int attribute. So the first part behaves exactly like the var1 value did, right? Let's do it again. If I click var1.dostuff1, it says dostuff1:1. This must be the default value for the int variable. If I click on var2, dostuff1:5, this is the value that we put in for the int variable. So the idea here is when you're actually executing a method, you use the syntax that we've been studying this entire time. But if you're trying to look up what methods are available to you, it's going to look a little bit different because it's being listed as if it were a menu item. Okay, so I've just created an empty class here. I'm calling it object context practice. And the idea is in this class I want to create real life objects from this thing that we've been looking at. So let's go inside and you'll see that I just have a class. It's a main method. I'm creating an object of this class and I'm feeding in a value of 6 and then computer science. I've already looked at the menu, so I know that, for example, I can call, what kind of methods can I call in my obj? Well, I know I can call a do stuff1 method on this object, right? I remember that this sequence of characters was the name of a method. I remember that I don't have to put anything in parentheses in order to call this method. And I remember that it doesn't return anything, right? If I were to say int x gets myobj.doStuff, this should be a compiler error. Sure enough, it is. It says incompatible types. The reason is the doStuff1 method returns void, or in other words, it returns nothing. So I'm not allowed to point some variable at the result. I have to leave it in a kind of a neutral context here. Now it works. I can say myobj.doStuff2, right? This was the name of a method, and this method had nothing in parentheses. Now notice that I'm not writing the word void. I'm not writing the word public. The word public and void are part of the method as a menu item. When you're actually using it, you don't write those words. Here, this is me actually executing the commands. Now there was another method, and it took an int as a variable. My mistake, it was actually your num times my num. But the important part is that this method takes an int as an argument, and it returns a number. So I can say int result gets, not just returns a number, but we know that this method returns an int data type. And so when I click compile, this all works. So if I want to find out what the answer of result is, now let's go ahead and guess what this is. Do you remember what the value, it's right here. The myobj variable was fed a 6 as its attribute, and just from the context, your num times my num, the idea is the user can put in some number, and it's going to multiply the number the user puts in times the number that is stored in its brain as an attribute. So this should be 42. And these two methods will also print something up. So probably the third line is going to be 42. And sure enough, so the doStuff1 method executes and prints out doStuff1 plus 6, doStuff2 prints it out plus computer science, and then this is 42. Again, what's actually happening isn't so important as the idea that if I create an object, the word void is just part of its description, but it's not part of the actual code you use to execute the method. So this is a menu item, this is a menu item, this is a menu item. This int describes how this method behaves, as does this int and all that stuff. Ask more questions in class, but hopefully that clarified some things.